Coming at you from a safe distance of 6 feet or more, I'm RJ Balde, and it's time to hash it out. The TRICHOMES Hash It Out podcast features talks about trending cannabis topics. We also bring in industry insiders and influencers to discuss their point of view. Today, as part of Convo 19, a special TRICHOMES series, I'll be talking to Claudio Miranda, co-founder of Guild Enterprises, about how the coronavirus recession is affecting the cannabis industry and its employees and what protocols are being implemented to adapt to the current market. We'll also talk about federal financial support and how well the administration did in helping U.S. industries prepare for the ongoing slowdown. Without further ado, here we are with Claudio Miranda from Guild Enterprises. Today, I am joined by Claudio Miranda, co-founder of Guild Enterprises, which includes the cannabis concentrate brand Guild Extracts. Claudio has over 20 years of experience in marketing, consumer branding, and sustainable enterprise, is a graduate of UC Berkeley, has served as professor of marketing at the Dominican University Green MBA program. So obviously, we're here to talk largely about what's eating up all of our attention and the attention of industries around the world, and that is the novel coronavirus or COVID-19. So first and foremost, how are you? How is your family? How is your community? How is your health? Like, how are you doing?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I'm very fortunate to say that I'm doing great. I'm personally healthy. My family's, no one's been affected that I'm aware of as of right now. And looking into the extended Guild family and all my kind of larger network of friends, I honestly don't know one person I'm thankful to say that right now has been infected. And I'm sure on the fringes, there's some people. I have heard friends of mine say that they know someone, but no one that's kind of in my immediate circle of friends and family has been affected yet as far as contracting the virus. So count my blessings on that one. And so far, so good. Now, certainly there's a lot of other kind of effects that we're all experiencing, but nothing in that direct way. How about yourself?
I have family that's in like the medical industry, especially in Michigan, which is now becoming like one of the new hot spots. So they're having to like reuse masks and gowns and stuff. And it's it's a very harrowing situation whenever we get an update from them. So it's good to hear that your tribe is staying healthy. I like to hear that.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, of course, of course. So businesses are already experiencing the effects of coronavirus closures. Layoffs have begun to surge nationwide, and the UCLA Anderson School of Management issued a forecast showing that the U.S. economy has indeed entered a recession expected to last until the end of September, at least. So how has the current state of the world impacted your businesses and the cannabis business or cannabis industry as a whole?
Sure. Well, in a lot of ways, obviously. So one thing, it's good for everyone to remember. We were going kind of on our 12th consecutive month now of a down economy for cannabis prior to coronavirus, right? And so the cannabis industry as a whole was already kind of being brought to its knees through its own industry recession. And if you kind of track the global index or the Canadian index for cannabis stocks, again, 11, 12 months of consecutive decline. And all of us in cannabis, certainly that's been top of mind pre-COVID, right? That there was just a lot of layoffs, a lot of downsizing, a lot of closures, a lot of distressed assets. And so, and furthermore, I think there's a lot of people that just outside of cannabis, looking at just kind of the macro economy, a lot of folks were predicting a recession for 2020 as of Q4 of last year. I know a lot of folks in the kind of the venture capital space that were already warning their portfolio companies about getting into cash conservation and kind of recession mode as of like last year. They were prescribing that. So, and none of that is to say anything about coronavirus, right? So lo and behold, here we get hit with coronavirus and boom, a big setback for everybody. So certainly, excuse me, for Guild Extracts, I think there's kind of the good news, if we can even call it that, is that we were already, really, really lean and mean pre-coronavirus. And I think a lot of cannabis companies had already gone through massive adjustments. in their forecasting, in their staffing, in their cash burn before coronavirus even hit. And so that I guess is the little piece of good news, that it's like we were already running really, really lean and mean going into this crisis. And so what that means for us is, we have not laid off anybody as of yet, thank God, and we don't plan to lay anybody off unless we absolutely have to, because again, we have a very core team. So that's kind of one aspect of that I know other companies are certainly laying off. But my understanding is that a lot of cannabis companies had already kind of gotten into lean and mean mode pre coronavirus, right? And so that's kind of one factor. Secondly, as I'm sure you're aware, the state of California, just for the audience sake, Guild Extracts is just a California company. We only operate in California, and so the state of California has deemed cannabis an essential business. And that has just been an absolute godsend, a silver lining in this otherwise really dark, ominous cloud that's over us. And so the fact that we're able to continue to operate as a cannabis company is amazing. And I'm happy to kind of go into the ramifications of that.
Yeah, and that's great that you are able to stay open and you have been deemed essential, because metrics have shown that cannabis sales have begun to jump during this pandemic, due in part to stockpiling and confusion over whether those cannabis businesses would remain open. In a lot of states, like Massachusetts, for example, they allowed medical dispensaries to stay open, but not recreational dispensaries to stay open. So what sorts of issues has that brought up for your company? I know you've said you don't have to lay people off, and so that is very good news. Has that helped you sort of mitigate this surge of business that might be coming your way?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, that's an interesting question, right? Because right now, even though we have not had to lay anybody off as a result of COVID, we do have this surge of business that really, really peaked last week. As we all know, this is really, as far as how it's really affected the economy, it's only been like 10 days. Things have been going on a lot longer, but it seemed to be like reality really set in, not this past weekend, but starting the weekend prior. And really last week is when we really started to see some substantive changes in the marketplace. And so on the one hand, yeah, it's great. Like I said, we don't have to lay off because we're already running lean and mean. But on the other hand, now we got this kind of tidal wave of demand that has come. And I'm happy to kind of speak to that because that tidal wave is ebbing and flowing a little bit. So now it's kind of like we're all rushing to kind of do everything we can to catch the wave and not kind of be under it, right? And that's certainly harder to do when number one, you're running a pretty core crew to begin with. And then number two, we have had to kind of sequester our team in the sense that anyone that can work from home is working from home. And for those that aren't kind of aware of how the essential business order works, is that it's not like, hey, you can just kind of run business because you're now cannabis and you're good to go. No, you still have to follow very strict guidelines in terms of you have to still, the overriding principle here in order is shelter in place. So any employees that can stay home have to stay home, that can work from home. And the only people that are really going into our facility right now are essential staff that are necessary to keep kind of our essential services in place, right? And so in other words, we're kind of dealing with half our staff right now that's really kind of actively doing their job in the way that they've done before. Whereas the other half is working from home, and even though they're able to stay productive, they certainly are handicapped in various ways of being able to fully affect their job in the way they were pre-coronavirus, right? And so that's kind of an interesting dynamic. And so that's kind of where we stand right now, is that we've got a very core skeleton crew that's really just on the production, packaging, and fulfillment side, ensuring that we can make our products and get them to our retail customers. And so that includes, of course, delivery or distribution. I'm happy to kind of go into any facets of that if you'd like to discuss how that's happening department by department. But it is, again, a core crew all the way from production through sales that's actively out there servicing our customers through kind of an essential function.
Hard to believe it's only been 10 days, huh?
Yeah.
You said that at the beginning. I was like, really? I had to look at the calendar. It's only been 10 days?
Yeah, I mean, as far as when this really became a reality, interestingly, I know a lot of people that prior to those 10 days, because we look at this last weekend and the weekend prior, right? For me, for example, it was around Friday, not this last Friday, but the prior, that I really started to be like, wow, like I should not be going out, like this is really real. And prior to that, it was definitely on top of mind for a lot of people, and there's a lot of people that were preemptively doing various things. But I think it hit critical mass starting, let's say, roughly that weekend before last is when I think everybody got on the same page that this is a crisis. And that's what we saw last week, was that kind of that rush to the shelves. People were just clearing out the shelves, and it did begin prior to that, but I think it really peaked out over that last weekend and into last week, where we saw consumers hitting the shelves across every kind of industry, mainly when it came to staples, foods, medicines, and things like that. And cannabis was no exception, right? Because consumers went in and were getting what they could. A lot of hoarding was happening because people just didn't know that, is this my last chance to get what I need to get before some kind of a national lockdown like we saw in China, right? So that's what really contributed to that surge, is we saw everyone just storming the shelves last week. And then what happened right thereafter is the shelter in place order came down first in the Bay Area counties, and then that spread through all of California as the kind of days went by last week. So as we started to hit the end of last week, consumers as a whole just knew, like, you better stay at home and you better not leave. This is real serious business. And so, what we saw the effect on the dispensary side is that foot traffic, what started off as a feeding frenzy, quickly started to diminish as people got the announcement, like, I got to stay at home. And everyone went out for that first surge, and then once they kind of scrolled away all their nuts, then all of a sudden that turned into a lull. And that's what we're actually seeing if you follow some of the metrics that some of the analytics companies are reporting, is that lull started to hit us this last weekend and into this week. It's not to say that cannabis sales is still not having a great kind of surge, but it's nothing like it was last week.
Wow. And in terms of the like the delivery side of things, what special precautions are your staff taking in order to make sure that everything is clean and you're not like contracting it when you're out there? Are there any special precautions that your staff is taking in that regard?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think first and foremost, it looks like every company right now is implementing emergency SOPs, right? Like kind of business as usual is I would hope at this point not on anyone's mind, right? Everyone has shifted to some kind of emergency or urgent kind of SOP structure that has changed the way they do business in some fundamental ways. For us, first and foremost, it means the health and safety of our staff, right? We need to make sure that anyone that's working at our facility, that they're giving the utmost kind of safety precautions are being implemented for them. And secondly, of course, anyone who's showing any symptoms whatsoever is forbidden from coming to work. And another element of that is that if an employee has a loved one at home, a child, a grandparent, a parent, whatever it may be, that has a compromised immune system, you're being encouraged not to come to the office. Because even though you might be well, if you contract something in the field or at the office and take it home, we know how that can have a devastating effect. So we've been really, really kind of strict about that, and still kind of keeping people paid for those that have to stay at home. First and foremost, finding things for them to do that they can do at home. And luckily, in this technology age, you can do a lot.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of that's like job one, right? Is people need to stay safe and healthy, and we've of course followed all the mandates from the CDC, the World Health Organization, and OSHA in terms of informing our SOPs of how to maintain that safe working environment for our staff. So that's been kind of number one. And then number two is really the comfort level of our staff, right? Safety is one thing, but you can have people in a bubble in the most sterile environment, but they still might not be comfortable. And so, and that's where you get the psychology element of it, right? People are rightfully scared right now, and there's a lot of fear. And so, even if we're meeting all the safety requirements, we've got to sit down with our staff and make sure they're psychologically comfortable performing any job duties we're asking them to do. And that's like the second criteria. And if for whatever reason they're like, I don't feel comfortable coming to work, then great, go home, do what you do at home. Let's figure out how you can continue to add value from the comfort of your home. That's kind of number two. And then number three is provided those two requirements are met, then it's like let's kind of try to maximize the efficiency of our operation and this opportunity that we have right now with cannabis sales and demand. And so just so now to answer your question specifically, but that's the backdrop of everything. Within that framework, of course, that when it comes to things like delivery drivers, our staff that's kind of delivering products, they're using all those protocols, right? Safe distancing. They're using, gloves and sanitizing, alcohol, Purell. Certainly with cash handling, making sure everything is as protected as possible. And certainly I can go into all the nuances of that, but I think suffice to say that all those precautionary measures are implemented so that our staff has minimum possible exposure to the virus in the workplace or in the field.
The amount of scrambling that everyone has had to do is absolutely mind-boggling. There's not one person that it's not affecting around the world, and it's definitely showing. And the crazy thing is because this is an unprecedented situation, and we collectively don't know how long it's going to last yet. My question is, how far ahead is your business preparing? Are you taking it day by day? Are you looking at a long-term sort of preparation? And are you expecting another wave of business, perhaps, if these quarantines get extended for longer periods of time? Are you expecting another wave, another tidal wave of business to come your way?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting you asked that. Just I sent out a memo to our entire management team yesterday, kind of as a sales report of sorts. That is kind of the state of the union right now. And part of it was exactly that kind of language, that if we had this kind of wave of surging demand, and now it's kind of that wave has died a little bit, there can very well be another wave, right? Like we don't know what to predict, and we like to use the analogy a lot internally of like surfing, right? That either you're riding the wave and you're on the wave, or you're underneath it, right? And you're getting crushed by it, or you're missing opportunity as a result of not riding that wave. And so we talk a lot about things in that fashion. And certainly we're doing everything we can to ensure that if another wave comes, or just anything for that matter, whether it's a sales opportunity, that's kind of a wave we can ride on the beneficial side of things, or if it's just another hard blow to the company and to the industry, that could be something like, hey, you're no longer an essential business, or the virus has kind of reached a climax that now you have to stay home. There is no such thing as an essential business anymore. Maybe, I don't know, right? And so on the one hand, we're definitely we're looking at the short and medium term. We can't look beyond medium term at this point, and so we're certainly looking at several days to next week, for example, and making sure that we just do our very best to stay in business and service our customers. But really, when it comes down tactically, it's a day by day thing. And the mantra internally for us is act today like it's our last day to operate as a business. And so a good example of that is, we're making very tactical decisions on an hour by hour, day to day basis. That's like, oh, should we make this product or test this product, or let's wait to test that product next Monday, right? And then I have to remind my team, Monday might not exist. So if we can test, like if we can test it today, right? And by Monday not existing, I mean like our lab partners might for whatever reason not be in business, or there could be something more on a macro level that makes us all not be in business. So we're really treating every day like it's our last and making sure that we're pushing the envelope as far as we can, keeping in mind, of course, the first two priorities, which is the health, safety, and comfort of our staff.
In a 2017 interview you did with Cannabis Business Times, you likened Guild to a specialty retailer such as a Dean and DeLuca, as opposed to a mass market joint like a Walmart.
Yep.
So in what ways does a smaller business have to adapt to a situation like this that differ from what the Walmarts of the world have to do?
That's really interesting question. Well, one thing, just as a point of clarification, I said that in the context of the Guild dispensary. Certainly, it applies to Guild extract, so I think it's a very relevant question. But just by way of clarification, the Guild Enterprises manages the family of Guild brands, and we licensed the Guild brand to a dispensary in San Jose, which is the Guild San Jose. And the context there, as far as the retail environment we wanted to create, is you're aware that there's a lot of dispensaries out there that take a very Walmart approach, where they might have 1,000 or more SKUs on their shelf and hundreds of brands, right? And we decided, kind of one of my roles at the Guild San Jose, as part of the licensing, I was there to ensure that the user experience of the store was consistent with the Guild identity and the Guild mission and ethos, right? I was not kind of a day-to-day operator, just kind of ensuring that user experience was there, and then working with their on-the-ground marketing team to ensure that user experience was upheld. And one of those was this specialty retail concept, right? That you're going to have fewer SKUs with greater product expertise in those SKUs. So when you go into like a store like Dean and DeLuca, which I believe since then has gone out of business, ironically, that if you go into any specialty retailer, be it like a really specialty wine shop or whatever it may be, you'll find that the salespeople have a much more depth of knowledge that they can impart on the customers. And it's because they're not having to remember 100 brands and 1,000 SKUs, right? It's impossible to have that level of depth. And so anyway, kind of bringing it back to coronavirus, we're already seeing with a lot of retailers that they're taking this kind of 80-20 rule approach, where like focus on the 20% of your brands that are driving 80% of your revenue. And why that's important in this climate is you're understaffed, you're overwhelmed, and you're in cash conservation mode. So if you only have like $1, are you going to put that dollar toward kind of some fringe boutique brand or product that maybe accounts for less than 1% of your revenue as a retailer? Or are you going to put that dollar on a brand or a category that is your bread and butter of your business, right? And so we're seeing a lot of that decision making with our retail partners happen on the ground, where they're really starting to think like that. And how that impacts us specifically as an extract brand is, we gotta see that the tides are changing in that direction. And so rather than, in other words, on the production level, rather than make more of our exotic extracts that are more boutique, exotic, higher price, like we better be going to our staples, things like cartridges or low price, or kind of our loss leaders that more consumers can access at a lower price. So that's the dynamic that's happening in the industry, and that's how Guild Extracts is just an example of how Guild Extracts is adapting to it.
Okay, so the $2 trillion stimulus package was passed today by the House of Representatives. It's now headed to President Trump's desk for approval. Meanwhile, this week, the Small Business Administration clarified that cannabis businesses don't qualify for federal aid because of the federal illegality of cannabis. So what is your reaction to hearing that? And what are you hearing from cannabis business owners and employees regarding that ineligibility?
Yeah, well, it certainly is unfortunate. It's that goes without saying, right? And I think it points to kind of a larger problem, right? If you think about that with cannabis, you don't have bankruptcy protection, you don't have access to banking, you don't have access to the benefits of these stimulus packages, and it's a real problem, obviously, right? That on the one hand, we're deemed an essential business. And in California, the language is you're an essential service that's critical to California's critical infrastructure, right? To maintaining it, right? So on the one hand, the message is, hey man, you've got medicine, you've got to get it out to the people. You're classified in a small group of essential businesses that need to keep running. And on the other hand, on the federal level, they're saying, well, you're not going to be able to avail yourself to the range of benefits that any company can benefit from, let alone an essential business, right? So you're just dealing with this stark contradiction between what's happening on the federal and state level. And that's always happened with cannabis, but that's really being exacerbated now, right? Where it's coming into like stark view that the inherent problems and contradictions in that opposition between federal and state. And it's now turned, what was an economic problem has now turned into a public safety problem. Because if me and my team can't avail ourselves of these things, now all of a sudden companies are being put in a really tough decision that could breach a line of security and safety and health for your staff because you don't have these safety nets to avail yourself of. And so it's a real problem that effectively what I'm saying is that the government has set things up in a way where cannabis companies are faced with a difficult decision to maybe actually do things that are not in the public good, that don't meet the health and safety of the public because we don't have these benefits that we can take advantage of, right? And so it's just created just another layer of complexity and contradiction to what was already an existing complex and contradictory system.
Sure. Yeah. And have you gotten any guidance from any state government officials or anything like that? Or are you still kind of in the way, it's the same waiting period that everyone else is in?
Yeah, well, look, there's different levels and kind of layers of this, right? I think what we're doing on a more local level of ways to alleviate the pressure and the burden that we're all carrying right now is we're actively lobbying on the local and state levels to get things like cannabis taxes, right? That we have, very high taxes that we have to pay, and we have to pay them on a regular basis to try to get some forbearance, deferment, waiving of penalties, things like that, right? Because right now, cash is king, right? You got to really conserve cash, and our quarterly kind of tax payments and licensing payments and all those things like that are coming up, right? And so as a cannabis operator, if you can not worry, if that's one less thing to worry about, and it's a substantial thing to worry about, these fees and taxes are huge. If that's one less thing to worry about, then great. Then to my earlier point, now instead of focusing on that, I can focus on keeping my employees paid and safe, right? And so that's what, at least on the local level, there are still things we can do within that state and city range of jurisdiction, right? On the federal level, we're navigating that as we speak. We're circulating a lot of the messages internally that we're hearing, as part of the stimulus package. But my initial read on a lot of that stuff is we're just ass out, for lack of a better word, right? That we can't take advantage of a lot of that stuff. But that's all being figured out in real time. I'm more focused on kind of operational challenges that our company's facing, where I'm fortunate enough to defer some of the analysis of that to our CFO and our head of HR.
Sure. And how would you describe the quality of help that the current administration and the federal government provided in facilitating preparations and communicating key information in terms of bracing for an economic crisis like this?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. Yeah, no, I mean, if I understand that question correctly, right, it's almost like a lot of us believe that they just didn't, right?
Sure.
They're not in real time. They're not. That unfortunately, the ideology of the current administration is to obfuscate, to confuse, to not provide kind of clarity and true leadership in these incredible times. We're just not seeing that. It's very confusing and bewildering in terms of how our administration is approaching this crisis. So we're seeing now that the ideology is economy over people, or that there's an exchange to be kind of weighed there. That hey, like okay, so certain people will die as long as we can kind of keep doors open of business. And although I can certainly appreciate that there is something to think about there, just the fact that they would even like remotely consider that someone's life is expendable for the sake of keeping a business running is pretty insane from my perspective. And so the short answer is that the forewarning and the continued kind of leadership that one would expect from our administration is sorely lacking, to the point where it's becoming borderline criminal. And one might argue to me and say, "Are you kidding me, man? It is blatantly criminal, right?" But I'm trying to be conservative in the things I say. But yeah, it's a bummer. It's a little sad. We don't have leadership on that level, and luckily we have stronger leadership on the state level. Very happy to see how Governor Cuomo is leading his state, and a lot of people are looking at him, being like, he's presidential, like he's the person that we should be looking to in terms of how he's handling his crisis. Not to say at all that he's handling it perfectly, but certainly we're seeing a lot more leadership from Cuomo and Governor Newsom than we are from President Trump.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's really highlighting the schisms between state and federal governments, where most people are relying mostly on their state government officials for actual fact-based updates over the federal government, because the president is making Dr. Anthony Fauci touch his face in disappointment when he's standing behind him during his press conferences. So
that's right.
Yeah,
it's insane. It's like the clown show kind of continues, and it's happening at a time where we're in an unprecedented crisis, and the tragic and comedic elements of that are profound. It's a really, really interesting time.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, on that happy and rainbow colored note, I thank you so much, Claudio Miranda, for joining me. I'm glad to hear that you're in good health, and I'm glad to hear that your business is in good health. And I sincerely hope it remains that way. And I hope to perhaps see you and join you in person, as opposed to from a safe distance here in self-quarantine someday.
Yeah, for sure, man. Likewise, and thank you so much for the opportunity. And absolutely, I think the real message right now is everyone kind of stay safe and healthy, obviously, and put people first. And I mean, this is the time to get to really exercise empathy and compassion for those around us, and sometimes it's tough to balance that with business, right? And so I think right now is the time to really to kind of show your mettle and take the moral high road. And for those of us that are kind of battling it out on the front lines of business, you just got to kind of keep that moral imperative in front of you while trying to service your customers. And it's just the time is more challenging than ever for striking that balance and trying to persevere. So best of luck to everybody and you guys, of course, and hopefully we'll all be able to look back on this one day and see it as a great life lesson that led to improvements in how we live our lives and manage our businesses.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot to learn from this. Claudio Miranda, thank you so much again for joining us, and stay safe, stay healthy.
Awesome, man. You too, and thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. My thanks to Claudio Miranda of Guild Enterprises for joining me. If you are a member of the cannabis community and have a story you want to share with us, we would love to hear from you. You can reach the show at hashitout@trichomes.com. You can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at trichomes.com and following us on all social media. Hash It Out is produced by David Fortin and presented by trichomes.com. I'm RJ Balde. Thanks for listening.